you very much, Taoiseach. We know nationally and indeed internationally now it's accepted that the scale of mortgage arrears continues to be a huge problem. It's a problem that's impeding our economic development, and it's a problem that's impacting socially on the lives of tens of thousands of people up and down the length and breadth of the country. Now, your government's approach to this has been to introduce a mortgage arrears a code of conduct, and in that code of conduct, obviously, you gave a veto to the banks. The Fianna Fáil alternative policy was to establish an independent mortgage resolution office. You didn't buy into that policy. We now see some considerable period of time down the road that the code of conduct for mortgage arrears is effectively ineffective. It's not working. It's not serving the interests of borrowers. And today then we have a very interesting report from the central bank that has looked at the activities of 7 lenders and found that those lenders are in breach of the code of conduct. So can you tell us today, Taoiseach, what are you going to do about that? What actions will your government take to ensure that the banks, in fact, comply with the code of conduct? Mr. Noonan has said in the past that there are no sanctions that can be applied to banks if they don't cooperate with the code of conduct. Yet those same banks are out there at present recruiting are trying to recruit new mortgage holders. So it's in the interests of the current mortgage holders that there is some penalties applied to the banks for breaching the code of conduct, and it's certainly also in the interests of those who would take mortgages from these lenders to know the culture of the lender that they're going to deal with. So can you tell us, will you ensure that these banks who have breached the code of conduct are named and shamed, and that there is some penalty imposed on them?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
It's a good question, Deputy Fearghaíl. Clearly, the government have set out its view on mortgages and the code of conduct for quite some time. And as you're aware, the government recently made a decision to bring further changes into the insolvency regime, dealing with the opportunity for further facilities for mortgage holders. I think that it is utterly unacceptable that any lender would breach this code of conduct for mortgages. Now, the position, as you're well aware, is that the central bank regulates the lenders, and the central bank is now engaged in part of a process here that it delivers on independently of government. But the code of conduct for those with mortgages is very clear and is very fair in respect of those who are borrowers from any of the institutions. You ask a question, what's going to happen next? Well, the process is underway, and this report comes from the central bank, which is the regulator. Now, the central bank obviously have gone through examples of where the code has been breached by lenders. It is now a function and a responsibility of the central bank to set out whatever sanctions it desires to impose on these lenders, and those sanctions, Deputy Fearghaíl, would be publicly announced and publicly named, because it would be a public decision. So it's not a case of the Minister for Finance setting out the sanctions here. The regulator is the central bank. The central bank have conducted a report. They've identified breaches of the code of conduct by the lenders. I think it's very serious for those who are borrowers in this case to have this kind of undue pressure put upon them. But it's now the next stage of that process is for the regulator, that is the central bank, to set out the sanctions that it intends to impose on those lenders in the first place, and those decisions will be publicly announced because it's public information.
Of the essence, Taoiseach, because the longer this matter is deferred, the deeper into arrears people get. People need solutions now. Can you give us an indication of the timescale that is involved in the solution that you put before us? I'm interested in the fact that today the central bank says that there's a problem with 7 lenders, but it doesn't name those 7 lenders. I would contend that the public are entitled to know, that the public could take action themselves and make make their own decisions had they that information. Now, you and your government gave the banks a veto. It would appear that today the central bank is giving further cover to the banking system in this country by withholding the information. And I understand the Central Bank Act provides for information to be disclosed where the information is in the interests of the consumer. Well, surely to God, it is in the interests of the consumer that this information be put into the public realm. And what sort of timescale are you talking about before that happens? Secondly, can I just ask you, what is being done about local authorities who are also lenders and who, in my experience, are proving to be as ruthless in dealing with borrowers in difficulties as any of the banks? Who is watching? Who is overseeing the activities of the local authorities as lenders and their activities in forcing people out of their family homes?
Thank you. Well, you mentioned the point about the banks and when they can deal with this. The central bank themselves have stated that they have sufficient powers to manage this process and to manage it effectively. I hope, Deputy Fearghaíl, that the central bank, as the regulator, will deal with this matter publicly, swiftly and effectively, in that the examinations that they have carried out with their quite rigid inspection regime, where breaches of the code of conduct have been identified, will be sanctioned, and that the sanctions will be known and the institutions will be known. The inspection examined compliance under the resolution of arrears, transparency, fair process and the process of improvement and controls. So I don't speak for the central bank here, but I do hope that in following on their own statement that they have the powers and the legitimacy to manage this effectively, that they will now do so swiftly and effectively and publicly, because these are public decisions. In respect of local authorities, whether you're talking about borrowing or cases that go for repossession, you are aware that the situation insofar as when personal insolvency practitioners made arrangements that were not acceptable to banks, that's where the bank veto applied. The government intend to change that, and that legislation is being prepared. Clearly, the Minister for the Environment will be interested in examples of what you say, where local authorities are involved, either for a repayment of loans borrowed maybe some time ago, or the case of where local authority are pursuing people for non-payment of mortgage arrears. Clearly, the situation is dealable with under the insolvency regime, but has to be amended now because of the actions of some of the banks, and that legislation is being prepared.
Thank you.